I'm Ariana Brocious.
I'm Kushan Avidar.
And this is Climate One. Right now, it can feel like there's a real lack of climate leadership and action.
The Trump administration has actively rejected any attempt at addressing the climate crisis.
Yeah, the story here in the U.S. feels bleak. Federal rollbacks, court fights, and headlines about us stepping back from global commitments like the Paris Agreement again. Even the language federal officials are using is dismissive.
It's all true, and it's also true that if you zoom in a little closer, you start to see where action is absolutely being taken. We're talking about cities.
And that matters because about 80% of Americans actually live in cities.
I mean, case in point, Ariana, you and I both live in cities.
True, though Tucson and Brooklyn are very different cities.
Hey, Ariana, what are you talking about?
It's saguaro cactus, not saguaro, Kusha.
Never heard of that, but I trust you.
While federal leadership has abandoned climate policy, many city leaders have stepped up.
Today, we're talking to some of my favorite types of politicians. And yes, I do have a favorite type of politician, and it includes mayors, because they are really there on the ground. They're where policy talk meets action.
Right. Cities don't have the luxury of debating whether climate change is real. I mean, arguably, none of us do. But cities are managing the impacts from it in real time. In fact, when the federal government announced it would withdraw from the Paris Agreement the first time, hundreds of American mayors made a very public stand and said, "We're still in."
And not just in the U.S. Globally, mayors have doubled down on clean energy standards, electrifying buses, planting trees, the list goes on.
So what does that climate leadership really look like at the street level? What can a mayor actually control? And can city-level action meaningfully move the needle, even without federal support?
Eric Garcetti served as mayor of Los Angeles from 2013 to 2022. Then he served as ambassador to India under President Biden, and now he's ambassador for global climate diplomacy for C40. That's an international network of nearly 100 cities representing nearly a quarter of the world's economy. What's remarkable is that nearly 3/4 of these cities have already peaked their emissions. C40 may be one of the most significant global organizations that many people haven't heard of yet. In my conversation with Ambassador Garcetti, he highlighted the progress LA has made in the 13 years since he began his first term as mayor.
Los Angeles owns the largest municipal utility in the United States, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Helped build the Hoover Dam, famously stole water from the Owens Valley, et cetera. And when I came in, about 2% of the power we generated for the people of LA was renewable, 2%. And we are now past 60%. By the end of the decade, we'll be at 97%. And by 2035, we'll be 100% renewable. So almost in the time that I've had my career in public service, I've watched it go from virtually zero all the way to 100, which is, to me, incredible. I mean, to see those days where we have in the state, not only solar as the main driver of our power, but then storage being the number 2, which people never thought would happen. When I became mayor, though, really looked at the 5 zeros, zero carbon electricity, which I just talked about, zero carbon transportation, zero carbon buildings, no waste, and no wasted water. I think waste is the one furthest behind, and all of us really have to contend with how we're going to get a recycling or reuse regime that works for everyday people and that actually isn't just us throwing it into a bin that makes us feel good but never gets recycled. Zero water takes the longest, but we're going to recycle 100% of our water, and we're on track to do that. And I'm really proud of that because that will almost give us 50 to 60% more water in LA. Droughts will never keep us from being able to sustain population growth and life. But we've done that in a smart way too, where people are planting native plants and doing the right things for, their neighborhoods. But it's those other 3 that are really where the bang for the buck on the global climate crisis is going to come from. And, I see it in the buildings that we're building. I'm really proud of the progress that LA is making on new construction. A lot of great programs to take existing buildings and put everything from insulation that we subsidize, or do things like retrofitting their homes and reducing their power consumption. I mentioned how well we're doing on the electricity, and transportation, is I think probably the underperformer too right now, because we just don't have enough options. We need to be able to buy electric vehicles this country's policy to move away from EVs recently makes it even tougher to find those buses in particular that will be a big part of that transition. But that said, from growing up in Los Angeles, where we were the smoggiest city in America with the worst pollution, and reducing those emissions by over 90%, I think that's real, tangible progress. That means my daughter will grow up with lungs closer to 100% their capacity, unlike my generation, which studies show is probably about 85% our lung capacity.
I want to step in for a second because that statistic, that trend of going from, you said virtually zero to, I would say virtually 100%, is really striking. What were the hard decisions that had to be made to make that possible?
I'm so glad you paused there, because we hear numbers all the time in climate, tons of CO2 or percentage of renewable.
Yeah.
And people don't realize there's a huge human struggle to organize, to get votes, to work through the science with scientists and other people. And then, the bureaucrats or the officials who actually run departments have to implement the things that policymakers put as goals that may or may not be realistic.
So, and everybody's a human in that conversation, right? Like everybody, it's 100%. Like the change is so hard. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, don't worry. And activists, I think, sometimes think it just, as long as you say yes, it will happen.
Right.
But even after you say yes, you need a lot of really good technical people to make that happen. I'll go back to one story. In 2000, I think 2 or 3, we were voting to renew our coal plant that I believe was either Navajo, which was on Navajo territory in the Southwest, or one of the other neighboring ones in the Southwest, because Los Angeles imports a lot of this dirty coal burning power that was predominantly in Indian land. And I kind of was like an early environmentalist. Nobody was against this. Our city legislative administrator, who's kind of the shadow 16th council member and the most powerful by far, said, I bet you're an environmentalist, you're going to vote against this, but don't worry, we got this cooked. And I turned to another young council member, we were both in our early 30s, and said, don't you want to vote against this? His name was Alex Padilla. He's now our senator. And the two of us said, yeah, let's start organizing. And then suddenly we got 3, 4, 6, and it's a 15-member council. I think by the end of it, we had 9 votes that voted to divest for the first time from coal. And this chief legislative analyst came up to us and said, well, wait a second, how did you guys do that? And to me, that was a real turning point, because everybody inside the department thought environmentalism was a fringe part of running utility.
Right.
We'll do a little bit, it costs a lot. And, there were 3 or 4 times in that time when I was actually a council member where we had to say, I know it's more expensive today, but I'd always argue the long-term costs of living cheaply in the short term have to be assessed. It's not about the next year's budget. And so we were buying solar. We even did a feed-in tariff, which is when people can put solar on top of big industrial buildings, and we pay the landowners so they have a stake in it. Probably 3 or 4 times what solar power costs today. And everybody always says, though, if you hadn't done that, though, there wouldn't be the predictability to bring down the cost, so that now, when we opened up the largest solar and battery storage construction project in the nation's history for utility when I was a mayor, that was cheaper than a new gas plant. So, there's these moments in which you need to convince the people inside a department who might roll their eyes, okay, these lefty politicians or whoever want to do things, but they don't really know how to run a utility. And I love LA because we have the utility under our direct control, but we also have experts. And I think it was convincing them. The second thing I'll say is we involved the national government back when it was a positive partner for these things. So the National Renewable Energy Lab actually ran over 1 million scenarios with their supercomputers looking at the predictability, because people want to make sure the power doesn't go off,
right?
The cost, make sure that they can afford it, and making sure that it was 100% renewable. And they gave us the statistical and analytical confidence to say, this will work. And that's what finally allowed us to move to it.
And I'm always interested in that connection between like the environmental cause, but also like the human connection, kind of like what you're describing. And I'm happy that you brought up EV infrastructure too, because you push hard on building electrification. We've talked about building on EVs in LA. You have a wide scope too. So where do you see cities, and I'm not just talking about LA, but cities in general, actually moving the needle towards decarbonization? Where do you feel like they're falling behind at the same time?
Well, let me give a hopeful message first, because I think a lot of people are feeling down.
Sure.
And the first time this president was elected in the first term, I was chair of something I'd co-founded with 2 other mayors called Climate Mayors, which was the group of, mayors, by the way, who were, yes, Democrats, nonpartisan, like in cities like LA, and also Republicans. And we had, a few dozen folks who were looking at climate solutions together. And the day that the president announced he was going to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accords, the only country in the world to do that, it was one of those days where we had a real fork in our emotional journey. We could get depressed, go into a corner, ball up and cry. Or what we decided to do the second is we could actually pick up the phone and started calling people. And I was actually in Wisconsin at the time, and I started calling a few mayors saying, hey, if he's out, can we say we're in? In other words, cities will pledge the science and the methodology and the goals of Paris decarbonization, and we'll show America moving forward despite the federal government, not because of it. And at the end of that week, we got to like 100. And then like a
100
week
mayors.
later, it was over 200 mayors.
Yeah.
And then we had calls coming in from people saying, my constituents are bugging me to sign on to this thing that you're doing. Just put me down because it's too much pressure to take. And by the end, we had 737 mayors in 48 of the 50 states signed on this amazing coalition that one mayor said, if Hillary Clinton had been elected president, I bet we would have been pretty lazy about this. In some ways, there's this moment in dark times where we light the light and we realize our own agency. And no federal government, one you like or dislike, can take away most of the tools for things like building codes, for things like, the electricity, if you have a public utility the mix that you want to put in there, a lot of the regulations you have, and your transportation policy. So if you want to install electric vehicle chargers, as Los Angeles has done aggressively, we have the streets that we control, the sidewalks. I drove my daughter to school today and saw EVs plugged in on the street so that renters who might not have electric chargers have a place to charge and can get an electric vehicle.
Like on street parking, you're saying?
Exactly.
I would have loved that. I did street parking in San Francisco, actually. And I was like, man, I just wish that I had that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, it's tough.
No, I got my first EV in 1998. It was a GM EV1.
Whoa.
The movie Who Killed the Electric Car?
Yeah,
I'm in it when GM made the boneheaded decision and we were begging them to buy them, to crush all of these. And we did a mock funeral at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery here in town. And I think I said something like, they're going to have to pull this out of my dead cold Charger, but they did take the cars back. And I've been driving EVs ever since. And so when we see good policies at the national level, like we did in the Biden administration to install electric chargers, but none of them actually got installed, it wasn't just a federal problem. It really is a local problem that in our local areas, we didn't have the leadership where people say, we will take parking spots that today are for anybody and make sure that those are EV parking spots and put chargers there. We will take public parking lots and land and make sure that this infrastructure gets done. It was our own local opposition in some ways that slowed down that pace and didn't get those EVs in place. And then with our metro system here, we also have a really aggressive electric bus program. And we've installed these superchargers for instance, right by me a couple blocks away is the busiest BRT, bus rapid transit line in America, which goes through the heart of the San Fernando Valley where I grew up and where I live, a place that would be the 6th largest city in America. And they supercharge at the end of the line and go right back. And so it's quiet, clean transportation in a place where I grew up with the worst smog in America.
So I want to go back to the climate pledge of your bid with the 2028 Olympic Games, because they were built as the first climate positive Olympics. Was the climate positive part of it part of the Olympics pitch?
100%. LA's always been a games changer, not a game changer, but a games changer. We've, in 1932, we invented the Olympic Village, the podium, the photo finish.
Really?
Some of the first women's races.
That's so interesting.
All this crazy stuff. We even renamed 10th Street here because it was the 10th Olympiad, Olympic Boulevard.
Oh, cool.
Which a lot of people don't know. That's why it's called Olympic Boulevard. In 1984, 76 Olympics in Montreal had almost bankrupted the city. People said it's dead. There was boycotts in Moscow, boycotts coming to LA. And we launched a private sponsorship model and brought in the first wheelchair race and saved the Olympics, saved the US Olympic Committee, et cetera. And so we kind of said in our bid, we would make this the most sustainable games ever, even carbon positive, because every game says they're going to be the greenest, but that's really in the operations, like maybe they'll recycle a little bit more or have a couple displays that are about environmental activism in the city. The most radical thing we did is we said, we're not going to build an Olympic village. And we're not going to build any new facility, because the Olympics had gotten to this thing where in order to get the votes from the Handball Federation or the delegate from Senegal, they want something and you want to build it and you say, okay, I'll do that. Or they're building rail lines that get from the Olympic Village to the main stadium, but no actual person after the Olympics needs that line to exist. A waste of carbon, a waste of construction, and empty buildings and stadia sometimes afterwards. So we used UCLA's campus, which has amazing dorms and a food system that already works and already has sports facilities, as the Olympic Village. We said we will use existing facilities, or even more radically, in the case of something like canoe kayak, which we didn't have, we're going to go to another state, Oklahoma City, where it's already built and the best national course is already there. So we thought about how we could really put it in the, not sprinkling over the Olympics, but the bones of the Olympics. And now the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator is leading pledges from companies, whether it's electric chargers, whether it's the utilities, pledging to stand up 100% renewable power for the excess power we need to do. We're confident we're going to give more back to the grid than we're going to take out. And that's really exciting. I think it shows that the games can work and go back to the ideals of what the Olympics are supposed to do about inspiring people.
Yeah, and I think there is that kind of like micro macro thinking where so many of us are told how to repurpose things we already have in our own lives. It kind of sounds like that at a large scale, right? Like you have a facility you can already use, go use that facility. I think that's really cool. UCLA's campus, I hear their dorms are actually really good. So yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, it's not like when we went to college and nobody wants to borrow the drill from next door their neighbor. They want to go out and get a drill. We're like borrowing stuff from Paris that's getting shipped here from the Paris games. We're going next door. Like all of this is really the most sustainable model and example for human living, I hope.
Coming up, being a member of C40, a global network of climate-conscious mayors, comes with real responsibilities.
This isn't just an affiliation. It's not like a social club of mayors and cities. You have to have plans, adhere to plans, show progress, or you get kicked out of the club.
That's up next when Climate One continues.
Former mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, now serves as ambassador for global climate diplomacy for C40. And he says that this global organization of cities addressing climate change is making real progress, despite a lack of national level leadership. Garcetti sees this playing out both on the local level and on the international stage, like at the annual UN climate conferences known as the Conference of Parties, or COP.
Well, cities are the superstars. On one hand, if you go to the COP, I was down there in Brazil, and you see petrostates blocking anything, our country not there officially, and really no commitments made. On the other hand, when you compare that there's only one country on track for the science of the Paris Accords, that's Denmark. Congratulations, Denmark, always first in class, A+. But only one country of all of the countries are on track. But when you look at cities, 73% of those 100 largest cities have already capped their carbon, and 75% of them are on track or ahead of the Paris science. And here's the best statistic of all. Those cities are moving 5 times faster per capita at decarbonizing than the global average.
Wow.
So those 100 biggest cities, which are beasts to manage, trust me, I've managed one. They're like countries.
Yeah.
Don't tell me if you're a national prime minister or president, you can't do it. We are proving it by decarbonizing across the board. We haven't talked about ports, for instance. They started a green ports initiative to decarbonize ports, which are huge, huge polluters globally. We looked at, the ways that we can move and change even things like as simple as city zoning so that people live closer to where they work, encourage the telecommuting, all those things that, add up. And I'm proud that we are showing that sort of work. And cities really are the examples, not to shame countries, but I hope to inspire them.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it is that like these big cities move 5 times faster?
Well, I'm kind of prejudiced. I think that,
well, I asked you to come here, so please go ahead. I give you permission.
I mean, mayors and cities move at the speed of real time and real complaints, by the way. You'll hear it at the supermarket if you're not doing something. But, when the pandemic hit, I was chair of C40. It's the only network, by the way, of those 100 largest cities' mayors on any topic in the world. And I think it was my second Zoom call. I didn't even know what Zooms were still, because it was that first week of the pandemic, and I called them all together kind of felt like an Avengers movie or something with all the world's mayors across different time zones.
Yeah.
And we were in, I think, 60 different cities of those 100, which was remarkable. And the mayor of Seoul told us about, drive-through testing for this new disease that was out there. The mayor of Milan, and if you remember, that's where the first kind of real big peak was. People were
Right.
dying in northern Italy, told us how to ready our hospitals so that people wouldn't die in the hallways. I mean, it was very sobering, very dark, but very powerful stuff. And the next day, we started implementing this stuff. And my successor, Mayor Sadiq Khan, who is now the chair of C40 and the mayor of London, an amazing friend and individual, went to brief Boris Johnson, if you remember him, when he was
Yes.
still prime minister, and was describing this call and what mayors were instantly doing. We've built up the largest testing and vaccination sites in the world here in LA based on that kind of drive-through technology that we heard. And Boris Johnson turned to his cabinet and said, why aren't we doing any of this? And they said, sir, don't worry, we're collecting the best practices. We're going to put it in a report. We'll get it to you in a week or two. You can start talking to national leaders around the world about this. And Boris Johnson said that will take weeks and people will die. And so I use that example because I think mayors, I always say, good mayors borrow, great mayors steal. We're friendly and competitive. If I hear a good idea or see something on a trip to another city, like if I see the greening of cities in Mexico City or the bus rapid transit lines that are there, or in South America, or you see a breakthrough in clean air like Sadiq Khan is doing in London, I want to do the same thing in my city. And we move at the speed of tomorrow. And so we try, and if it doesn't work, we're not scared to fail and fail forward. We're not always like waiting for somebody else to do it. I think national leaders inherit a bureaucracy that's slower, and they're just by nature more cautious. Mayors are kind of more, in the best sense, entrepreneurs, cowboys, go for broke folks.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You're able to pivot quickly.
Yeah. And you have to, because your constituents demand.
Right. You hear about it in the shopping market. You're now serving as C40 ambassador for global climate diplomacy. So when you're at a dinner party, I doubt you get the question, hey, what do you do for a living? That's what I ask other people. But for you, when somebody's like, can you explain C40 for me? How do you describe the work?
Well, I describe a network, which is kind of, in my opinion, the tip of the spear of climate action. We are the ones doing work, inspiring work, organizing work, and it's accountable work. I always explain this isn't just an affiliation. It's not like a social club of mayors and cities. You have to have plans, adhere to plans, show progress, or you get kicked out of the club.
Oh, wow.
I mean, imagine a United Nations that was like this. Imagine you could no longer be a United Nations member if you didn't live up to your pledge in Paris, or to give development aid or whatever. Obviously, we can't do that with nations, but we are a really, I think, great model of how you can stretch further, beyond your reach, but also we are the ones that are quickly innovating and sharing. We're kind of an ideas laboratory that if London has a breakthrough and is giving backpacks with air monitors to kids so they can literally take their individual air quality where they walk to and from their home to school, like how do we spread that in more places? If Freetown in Africa is figuring out a way to plant more trees than anybody else, how can we get that citizen involvement that sustains those trees after they're planted and they don't just die? It becomes a place to share information, a place for accountable action. And when you look at the numbers, it's bigger than almost every other nation in the world. So when I was chair, I got to be able to go to Glasgow to the COP. And we didn't just look at the 100 cities, we expanded that through our other partner organizations. And we took 1,000 cities who held themselves to going to carbon neutrality by 2050. And when the UN put that together, they said that would have been the fourth or fifth largest emitting country in the world's pledges. And we were the only organization on the stage with prime ministers, kings, presidents, et cetera, the only non-national leader allowed to make that pledge. So now today, I'm in that system, being the negotiator with the UN, saying, will you join, for instance, something called CHAMP, which is a long acronym, which I don't have to say here, but it's basically a national government saying, we'll work with our states, provinces, regions, and cities to achieve our national goals. Seems elementary, but once they make that pledge, it works both ways. You can take all the credit for what cities or states are doing, and at the same time, you might pass great legislation like we've seen in this country, but the federal government isn't capable of implementation of much, because that's just not what a federal system like here or India or Brazil or other places have. So I get to do those negotiations, but then second, I get to inspire people to say, in these 15,000 cities, here are solutions. Here's the financing, by the way, that we need to get not just to national governments, but local governments. And don't forget, local governments are financing ourselves. We can quantify how much taxpayers at the local level are already putting into climate change. And then the last one, which is something got back to when I was mayor, we can prove the economic benefits. LA outpaced every other big city in America. Bloomberg News did this analysis. The investments we had made in water, in electricity, in transportation, they said probably 60 to 70% of the job growth was green industries, green jobs, and the green transition. So I always tell people, like, I don't care if you believe in this, your constituents are feeling the impact of climate change. But even if you're just a hard-nosed person looking at jobs in your city, we can make the case of why this is important. And C40 doesn't just do that in a macro sense. We look at economic justice and what are the communities that are left behind and how can we get those jobs to go into the poorer areas of any city. So it's really larger than just climate. It's about economic justice, economic stability, health, and safety, as well as getting these goals.
Can you think of an initiative that comes to mind where it kind of hit all those buckets, where there was that knowledge sharing, there was the on the ground advocacy, justice? It kind of puts it all together for you.
So we have a whole initiative on clean air in our cities, and we make pledges in the central district to make them oftentimes car free or single passenger car free. Those are immensely politically difficult things to do. Mayor Hidalgo in Paris closing down the freeways that were on the Seine so that people can walk and bike there. Mayor Khan in London, as I mentioned. In South America, we have a number of these cities. So we have a whole initiative just around, let's take the urban core of a city back and make sure that they are clean air zones. And whether it's the truck traffic, whether it's the single passenger cars, whether it's not enough investment in public transit, not walkable or bikeable communities, those, I think, are the ones that are really giving people hope in the short term that the climate movement isn't just about things that our children's children hopefully will inherit when carbon peaks and it comes down, but that will actually give relief right now to the quality of life, extend the life of people. I've been living in New Delhi for the last 2.5 years, and it's the worst air in the world. I mean, growing up in Los Angeles in the 70s, 80s, I thought was bad. Most machines stop at 500 on the air quality index in India. They cap there. But at the embassy, we had ones that can keep measuring up. We had a day where I believe it was the highest measurement in any city in human history at any time, 1,738.
Wow.
And it's estimated that in New Delhi, if you work outside or don't have air filters in your home, which the overwhelming majority of people don't, that probably your life is going to be cut 10 years short if this air quality stays in place.
That's tragic.
We saw it in Beijing, and China did great work to turn that around. And I gave lectures at Peking University about how LA had done it and how governance and popular participation is there. But when you look at that C40 initiative on clean air in the core of our cities, that's really about saving lives today, not about like saving the earth tomorrow.
You had mentioned trying to do the work during a more hospitable administration. My words, not yours, but trying to put this action into place. And the US federal government has oscillated dramatically on climate commitments, to put it mildly. So how do American cities maintain credibility with international partners when the policy just like shifts under your feet? How do you approach that?
Two things I would say. One is I always remind my international friends, there's the show and then there's the actual statistics. And sometimes the show, don't get me wrong, there's damage happening with the policies that the show is about, like that wind is suddenly bad or that we shouldn't have EVs. And we're ceding the future, by the way, competitively to other countries when we do that. We're shipping jobs literally outside of America. But then I also say the substance, the actual actions in places that aren't just California run by, a democratic government, or cities that are generally more liberal, more traditionally pro-environment, but places like the Permian Basin in Texas, which is a solidly red state, a place that is run by Republicans, where the largest oil basin in America is being decarbonized aggressively with solar and wind, with corporate investments that aren't political. I think there's a clash that'll happen between the show and even people on the so-called political right that know that this is where the world needs to move. It's where markets are moving. I have friends who are investors in this space who said there's never been more deals and they've never been cheaper. So keep on bad-mouthing environmentalism and we'll be able to buy it for even less and do it more quickly. So that's point one. Point two is when I was down before we started the actual COP in Brazil that was up in the Amazon, we were in Rio a week or two before with all the cities of the world, looking at the subnational level. We had American states there and regions and states and provinces from around the world. And of course, the biggest delegation of subnational leaders was Brazil because they were hosting. But the second biggest group, Kusha, was Americans. And I think that so many of my foreign friends said, this is awesome to see so many Americans not only showing up to say we're still here, but to say what they're doing, which is as aggressive as it would have been 2 years ago. Sometimes there's some limits, some micro handcuffs that we put on us, but the federal government isn't our partner, and that's too bad. That's their loss. But again, we haven't ceded the power we have. We haven't stopped the plans that we have. We haven't stopped protecting our people who are experiencing the front line of those fires and those floods and the damage and the lack of being able to get, insurance in a home in Florida or in California. And we see that the future is being written around the world, and we want to join with those people. And we want a country to emerge at the national level, we hope, in the future that will build on all of the great foundation that we're laying. So I think a lot of our international friends left there surprisingly optimistic about American leadership.
That's so interesting.
Obviously not at the top.
Yeah.
Not at the top. But leadership has always existed from the side and from behind, and all power. The point at the top is not the most important piece. It's the base underneath.
There's this other element to that I always have on my mind, which is kind of the inequity of those who contribute versus those who suffer to climate change. I feel like it's a great opportunity to get to talk to somebody who's worked on all different angles of that, because my understanding, at least, is that developing countries that have contributed the least to climate pollution are tragically the ones that face most of the effects, and there's a huge power imbalance. So when a leader from a richer, more powerful country works with leaders from less powerful countries, what's the best approach there? How do you navigate that?
Well, first you have to co-lead. Don't just talk about it, but do it. And so when I was chair of C40, we implemented that we would have co-chairs now from the global north and global south. Terms I don't love, but for shorthand. Yeah. So it's not just Sadiq Khan who is our chair, but also our co-chair is Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, who's the mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone. And we said we'd put a majority of our funding, then second, put your money where your mouth is. After you share power, share money, we're putting a majority of our funds into the global south. A, because it's the right thing to do from justice, and B, because that's where population growth and economic growth will be. So if they can do it better and not go through what London did in the 1800s and New York in the early 1900s and LA in the 1980s, if they can have clean air while they're industrializing, if they can get economic growth and not have to have the suffering that we see, that's the right thing for them and a good thing for the entire world. And then I think third, it's also looking at how we can find those solutions that are indigenous to those areas in the developing world. When I was ambassador, for instance, one of the first trips I took in India was to Ahmedabad, which is the capital of Gujarat in northwest India. And I talked with a group, there's an incredible women's association of tens of thousands of chapters called SIWA. That's self-help basically for women. And there's a lot of construction workers in India that are female, not so many here in the United States. And I was talking to a bricklayer, a woman who said, it's so hot on the hottest days here, and it regularly gets above 120 there. She said, even with gloves on, I can't hold the bricks. And because of that, I can't work. And because of that, my family can't eat. And we looked at a model where they kind of came up with, and we got some capital in from, the West to be able to fund an insurance for jobs that are climate sensitive so that she can get paid those days and feed her family. And then she pays a small bit when she does work to go into that insurance so that she can make sure her family survives.
Yeah.
So I think, finding those solutions that are actually coming out of places like Africa, that are coming out of parts. And by the way, the developing and developed world are not just geographical split, they exist inside our own cities. So my
Of course.
experience knowing that in South LA, there's no shade,
Mm.
whereas of course in West LA, there's a lot of shade, made shade equity a big part of my agenda. And so I say this methodology is good not only across the world, but within cities too.
Yeah. I don't like the term bottom up. I try to think of it as like you go to where the people are experiencing what's going on and you ask them what would help. But like where you go for ideas, I think is so crucial too. So I appreciate that you said that.
It's maybe bottom out
Bottom
because the
out.
bottom is
Yeah.
always, the one that has the foundation like we talked about that allows the top to put a few things on there. And don't get me wrong, national leadership is critical. It inspires us when it's good. It can pass legislation that can enable that base to widen even further and
Mhm.
to be strengthened even stronger. But yeah, we don't have to show prime ministers, we don't have to show presidents the solutions. We just have to be able to do them ourselves. That's all
Mm.
we're asking from our national leaders to join with us in what we're already doing.
I am delighted to hear you say that because that is a perfect segue into my last question, which let me know if you feel like you can answer this. I would love a hopeful message right now. So Ambassador, please indulge me. Diplomacy. Is it for 2026? I mean, it's easy to look at the world and think that like global diplomacy in general, climate diplomacy specifically is breaking down, I guess. What's the conversation that needs to happen at the global levels to get diplomacy back on track? If you think it is off track, I don't know, but just like, how do we make
It is
diplomacy live? Yeah,
100%.
please. How do we make diplomacy live?
Well, it's both off track and it was ending its kind of lifespan. This incredibly stable building we've been living in, which, post World War II had like international diplomacy and, by the way, American democracy, very stable. We didn't have to do much. They were always going to be there. Remodel it, change the pipes every so often. Suddenly is on fire. And maybe it's because somebody's thrown a Molotov cocktail in there. But I would argue, even if he hadn't, this building needed to come down. The diplomacy and development and even bureaucracy has slowed things down at a time when the crises we have require a faster pace. We're slower than ever. And so diplomacy for me, I'll tell you, if there's one lesson I've learned in my 2.5 decades in public service, it's about relationships. Nobody teaches this in the classroom, but it's about the relationships and the feelings that we have as human beings. And I always say when I'm giving a speech, I want somebody to know something they don't know, feel something they haven't felt, and do something they wouldn't do. And those last two, I think diplomacy, if we can get people to feel again, and we're seeing diplomacy that's all about, there's no win-wins. Me doing well doesn't mean you're doing well, so I'm going to be the bully and I have more power, so I'm going to take something. That's just not the way that community, families, neighborhoods, cities thrive. We know we have to all, because I can be the mayor, but if I don't fix traffic, I'm stuck in it. If I don't, deal with somebody who's unhoused, that person's outside my residence. So there's a real accountability that comes from local leadership, and diplomacy, I think, at its best is about those relationships and what we give. True power, Kusha, is not what we hold on to and what we hoard, but what we're willing to give up and share. And it's the same thing with diplomacy. So I do think that there is the cracking open, or maybe a return to that basic human thing that's not naive, it's not idealistic, but it is relational, because if anything ties us together, it's those borderless problems. It's health, and it's climate. And we're certainly lived through a pandemic that, we knew that a virus didn't care about borders. And we're experiencing too that this climate crisis doesn't care as well. And if we're going to survive, and we all want to, let's figure out a way to be a little bit more understanding and to share in that power that we have. And that's the kind of diplomacy I hope emerges.
Eric Garcetti is C40 Ambassador for Global Climate Diplomacy and former mayor of Los Angeles and former ambassador to India. Ambassador, thank you so much for hanging out with us and for all of your work.
Thank you.
Coming up, Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego is taking on one of the hottest issues around the country.
We have one of the biggest concentrations of data centers anywhere in the world. And I'm trying to make sure that as data centers come on, they do it in a way that minimizes impacts to our community and to our environment and maximizes benefits.
That's up next when Climate One continues.
Phoenix is on the front lines of the climate crisis. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country and one of the fastest warming. In Phoenix, extreme heat isn't an abstract threat that could happen in the future. It's a public health emergency happening right now. So what does climate leadership look like when your city regularly tops 100 degrees? To Mayor Kate Gallego, it means redesigning streets, rethinking building materials, grappling with the energy and water demands of a booming tech economy, and dealing with the heat.
We are actually the first city in the country to have a permanent part of our city government that's focused on heat. In our case, it's the Office of Heat Response and Mitigation. We have an all-of-government approach, so from our fire department to our planning department, we try to find solutions related to heat. Our fire department has been national leaders in supporting people with heat-related medical emergencies, and this could be everything from someone experiencing homelessness to someone who is hiking and has heat stroke or doesn't bring enough water. So we now have some pretty advanced cooling techniques, and then some pretty basic ones like pre-positioning ice in key areas.
Ice, just to clarify, in the moment we're in, you mean frozen water?
We position frozen water. We are trying to change our built environment, so we're trying to incentivize shaded walkways and paths. Even our Office of Public Arts has worked on shaded public art installations that create a wonderful environment for people to enjoy the beautiful city, but have a little bit more comfortable shaded walkways or canopies. We are trying to look at new building materials that make sense, as well as new paving materials. So we have a cool pavement program.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, this is basically painting them with a reflective material that takes the heat that gets absorbed normally by asphalt and sends it back up. It does sound like a really neat program. I have read also that it can make the surrounding area hotter for people, even though it can lower the temperature over the asphalt. So how is it panning out?
So we find it's most effective if we look at things like urban heat island and overnight heat temperatures. One of our challenges is that the natural Sonoran Desert environment cools a lot overnight with native conditions, but with man-made conditions, including black asphalt, that does keep the heat in, just as way you'd stay hotter when you're wearing a black t-shirt than a white t-shirt. And overnight, we're seeing the lows aren't getting as cold as they used to. So we're trying to use the cool pavement to try to bring down that overnight temperature and be more like the natural Sonoran Desert environment, which is so well adapted for hot summers.
Mm-hmm. When we're speaking about survivability in the hot months for people, average people in Phoenix, are there interventions that your government has worked on that help people with basic affordability of things like air conditioners? I mean, that is really kind of a essential thing to have here.
Yes, so we actually just had the whole city council convene around energy affordability, which is so important. We're trying to do everything from helping people navigate high summer bills to helping people get more efficient appliances, and then also trying to build better in the first place and make sure that we have the most energy efficient homes and public spaces.
Right. So like most parts of the country, Phoenix is seeing higher energy bills. That's being driven by a lot of factors. Data centers and their demand is one factor. I'm curious, in specific terms, what are you doing? What is the city council doing? Is it putting money into bill payment assistance? You mentioned building materials. Is it education? Like, what are the ways you're helping reduce those bills?
So we were so successful during the Biden administration. We pursued often with partners a lot of those federal dollars, and we're really trying to promote some of the great programs that included energy audits and helping people with federal assistance. We got a wonderful Solar for All grant in Arizona that we were very excited to help bring down people's bills. So it was like an incredible progress in that area. Unfortunately, we have seen a pause in a lot of that funding. It's being litigated. So I think we're still hopeful that there might be a chance to deliver on those programs, which really had the chance to be life-saving for some of our residents. We do know that certain residents, such as People in manufactured housing tend to have larger challenges around the heat. And so we're trying to particularly target those areas, including going out in the community and sharing what rebates are available, what bill assistance is available. And every year we make changes and learn more.
Yeah, that's really critical because a lot of those homes, mobile homes, manufactured homes, don't have insulation or very little and can really be little ovens, honestly, in the summer. I want to pivot and talk a little bit about population. Phoenix is the fifth largest city in the country. You've said that the population numbers aren't the important metric, it's how and where you grow. Your office had an achievement in securing the semiconductor $65 billion chip manufacturing facility. How do you reconcile things like that, the economic development that brings, with the water and energy demands of big tech?
We have limited resources and we have to be smart. So we are trying to prioritize the areas that will have the most benefits for our community, including creating quality jobs. Phoenix has traditionally been very tied to the real estate sector, and so we want to make sure that we are a diverse economy that has a bunch of different options. We know every sector goes up and down, and so the cities that have the most diverse economies tend to be able to weather single events more effectively. The 2008 real estate crisis hit Phoenix incredibly hard. I know so many people who lost their homes, fought with their spouses over money, got divorced, really were devastated by the real estate crisis. So we are trying to build a more diverse and sustainable economy. We've made big pushes around climate tech, trying to attract solar companies, advanced vehicle technology, bioscience as well. One of the things that I have grown very concerned about in terms of tech is we have a very large number of data centers. Mm-hmm. And I would like us to see some changes in that area. We want to make sure that as data centers come on, they are responsible water users, and that particularly with the amount of power they use, they think about everything from emissions to the water used to generate power. That's been a big challenge for us in our community. The utility that serves us at City Hall had committed to taking coal out of their portfolio, and because of the huge demand in energy, particularly driven by data centers, they're delaying that. So that's of concern to me. We have one of the biggest concentrations of data centers anywhere in the world. And I'm trying to make sure that as data centers come on, they do it in a way that minimizes impacts to our community and to our environment and maximizes benefits. But we need a race to the top, right? We want higher standards. We want to reward the companies that care about emissions, climate change. We want to put data centers where they're the biggest benefits.
Yeah, let me jump in there because I think this is a discussion happening all over the country. I know that you've been working on developing regulations to help keep data centers from having negative impacts on the surrounding communities. And I'm wondering if those are sufficient so far. I mean, can you give us a little bit more detail about what you're asking of these companies?
We have regulations for all of our large water users where they really need to commit to sustainability and work with our water services department on conservation. So that applies to all large water users. On data centers, we've recently asked them to come to the council and get a special use permit. We look at a variety of different impacts, including areas like cybersecurity and noise, in addition to the type of concerns that you and I have been talking about. Unfortunately, there's been some real challenges around that. We have had data centers that have suggested they might litigate with us over whether we have the ability to do that. And in some cases, some of the wealthiest companies in the world have questioned whether it's fair to ask them to do landscaping. They've found that to be overly burdensome. So this is a real debate right now.
There's this idea that you could co-locate energy production and energy consumption. So these data centers could pay to supply their own solar panels, which is probably the most cost-effective and reasonable thing in a state like Arizona, to just sort of power their own needs, and thus they're not going to be impacting other electric users as much. Is that something that either is on the table in discussions you've had, or you've seen any developers bring forward, or that you've put forward?
So I would say Google has done a one of the better jobs really trying to bring on new clean energy. In Arizona, they've invested in both solar and wind. And to me, it seems they are really new projects that the market has helped drive on. But overwhelmingly, we're seeing the new data centers come on with fossil fuels as the main power. Some coal, but predominantly natural gas. Some of these power plants have water sources that I don't think are the most appropriate. When you look at other parts of the country, in mayor world, the mayor of Lansing, Michigan has gotten a lot of attention because he helped bring a data center that took its waste heat and put it into a district heating system and helped reduce the need for other heating technology. So brought down residents' bills and I think offset some greenhouse gas emissions. So that would be an example of putting a data center where there might be more benefits for the community. We don't have a lot of need for additional heat here, so we're more interested in district cooling. But I think there are real opportunities to be strategic and maximize benefits with these data centers.
Mm-hmm. Apart from data centers, which Phoenix innovations do you think are most transferable to other hot and arid cities in the U.S. and globally?
I think we need to be smart about looking at our built environment. In our case, many of the solutions we use are solutions that the Native Americans who founded our community used. Smart building orientation. We know planting desert-adapted trees can make a huge difference. Phoenix is part of American Forest program around tree equity. So we look at our city and the different economic zones and try to make sure we really think about equity and for communities that haven't always received their fair share of investment, that we really look at prioritizing trees in those areas. We're trying to plant trees where people are more likely to be walking. So that might be like between the school and the library, and be intentional about creating cooler, comfortable corridors. So those solutions seem to make sense in so many communities. And even in our divided times, we really feel like trees can bring people together. Mm-hmm. We are one of the sunniest big cities in the country and have had great success with investing in solar energy. We've done some cool projects where we put solar at public housing and then helped our residents bring down their bills. They also created more shaded parking, so very popular program. And we try to find win-wins where we reduce emissions, but also have other benefits to our community.
Conversely, have there been lessons that you've taken? I know you were chair of Climate Mayors last year, that you've learned about, in conversations with other mayors, other cities that you've adopted in Phoenix.
When mayors get together, there can be a little bit of shared ambition and perhaps a little bit of that race to the top that I mentioned in the context with data centers. So sometimes I'll see someone else's tree and shade plan, and my $60 million commitment might need to get a little bit more ambitious. I have learned from mayors all over the world. So Mayor Yaki Sawyer in Freetown did a great tree planting program where she had local residents get training and lead the way and invest in trees in their community and get paid to maintain those trees. So you get to educate your residents, they get to improve their local neighborhoods, and you're creating jobs. So that was a great example where I learned from a project that was in Africa and was able to bring that to Phoenix. And it's so popular and people feel such an ownership, even if the tree's in public space. If you plant a tree, in some ways it becomes your tree. Mm-hmm. And then the more people who know how to maintain trees for our desert environment, which does have some pretty intense monsoon storms, the more we can take care of the city's investment, because when we plant a tree, we want to make sure it's healthy and thriving.
Right. So we're in an interesting, contentious moment politically in terms of national politics. And you touched on sort of the I don't know, we've called it whiplash, honestly, in climate policy from a federal level that we saw from the Biden administration to the current Trump administration. So what leverage for climate action do cities have that national and international bodies don't?
We have had enormous support from our voters when we've asked them to do local funding. So we have gone to our voters for everything from a sales tax to support busing to general obligation bonds that included green infrastructure and heat. That's not just true in Phoenix. I'm talking to a mayor from coal country in Ohio who went to the voters and got strong support for renewable energy. So I think the fact that we're the branch of government that's closest to the people can be really helpful. When I talk to the people of Phoenix, they want smart, sustainable water policy. They believe in taking advantage of the wonderful sun that we have and solar energy here. And it's been great to see that support directly from the voters. So that may be our secret sauce for local government, is building coalitions, partnerships, and from local funding to local implementation, engaging in the solutions that make sense.
Yeah, and beyond local government, what's the political strategy for maintaining momentum on climate action when the government at the federal level is working so hard to roll back climate advances, climate policy?
One of the key issues for us in our community still is affordability. So the more we can do to help people reduce their energy use or use less water, that can be very helpful, or find more affordable investments, which could be things like rooftop solar. But we really have had to understand the context we're in and look at solutions that meet the moment around affordability. We also are really trying to modernize tax codes, and fairness really matters in our community. So right now with data centers, they get a very aggressive subsidy around their sales tax, which is a key funding for us in local government. So can we maybe say, sales tax supports our firefighters, and it is a lot more complicated to fight a fire at a data center than your neighborhood coffee shop, yet your neighborhood coffee shop is paying a higher sales tax rate. Should we look at fairness and try to incentivize good policy through tax policy that treats the big guys and the little guys evenly?
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. You're saying, there's ability at the local level to form more consensus, to reach people on the issues that they really care about. What lesson can we take from how climate mayors work together and share information?
Cities have this really special relationship with each other where we're willing to share good ideas and best practices. So, I can talk to my fellow mayors about cool technology they've invested in, whether it's their new electric fire truck or a great energy management system that saves a ton of money and energy for their city. And everyone's been willing to share. I think that's true for people in their everyday lives. So would encourage folks, get tips from your friends, just as I get tips from my fellow mayors, and learn, don't be afraid to talk about, do you have a cool app that's helped you with your smart thermostat and really manage your own energy use? Or do you have tips for the best bike path and way to navigate around town? I think we can all learn from each other, and there's that spirit at the city level right now.
Yeah, I love that. Lessons from each other. Kate Gallego is mayor of Phoenix, Arizona, and former chair of Climate Mayors. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on Climate One.
Well, thank you so much. It was good to have a fellow Arizonan, because there are things we just do differently.
Daylight savings, not a thing here, Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Kusha and Ariana. It is the end of our show, and we have one more thing to share with you. Our climate one more thing. Kusha, what have you got?
Okay, I saw a really cool article I think people will dig. Oh, that's actually a pun, I realized, but you'll get it in a second. So right now, underneath every single field, underneath every single forest on the planet, it turns out there are these really vast fungal networks that kind of act like the planet's circulatory system when it comes to carbon capture, because this fungal network draws down the equivalent of 13 billion tons of carbon a year. And that represents about a third of all fossil fuel emissions.
Whoa.
And until very recently, Ariana, we did not know that this fungal network was so vast and captured so much carbon. But recently, a scientist named Toby Kears just won what they call the Nobel Prize for the Environment for mapping out all of this network. And what I loved, and this goes back to the pun at the beginning, her quote that I loved in the article is when she said, "A bag of dirt contains a galaxy." I just love that line.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I did not know that, and it makes me think about the power of these systems all across the world because we know, for example, the oceans have already sequestered and captured a ton of the carbon that we've emitted, and that's helped keep our planet less hot than it would be. So now it sounds like there's another system, or yet another system, that's working on behalf of the whole planet, and so we should protect that first. And do you happen to know, did the article say, is there a way to like increase the carbon sequestration of fungal networks?
The fun guys? That's a good question. I was wondering the same thing.
Can you make them more fun?
I don't know. Maybe we should ask Toby to come and tell us. I don't know. It seems like at the very least you have to protect it, right?
Yeah.
But it'd be an interesting next step if it hasn't happened yet, which I'm sure some folks are thinking about right now.
All right, well, that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. And we want to say a special thanks to the listeners who have left us a voicemail on our SpeakPipe. And you can do this too. We love hearing from our listeners. We love to know what you're thinking, what ideas you think we should explore. You can leave us a voicemail without leaving your browser by going to our website, climateone.org/hello, and hitting record.
Climate One is a production of the Commonwealth Club. Our team includes wonderful people like Greg Dalton, Brad Marshland, Jenny Park, Austin Colon, Megan Basilia, Ariana Brocious, and Rachel Lacey. Our theme music is by George Young. I'm Kusha Navidar.